course, I'm joined by Dr. Harun Hassan. He's a governance and leadership expert. And we want to discuss, of course, the protests that are happening in Kenya, and then we'll go to Sudan and see the crisis that's ongoing there. So thank you so much for making time.
Thank you very much. I think what is going on in the country at the moment, what is going on in Nairobi and Kisumu and other part of the country where the demonstrations have begun, we may not refer it to demonstration, how things are appearing. Initially, we thought demonstrations are just demonstrations, picketing, and must be peaceful, and nobody targets specific Kenyans who are doing their own businesses and going about with their own daily life. However, this morning, from the reports that we are getting, you see there are quite a number of incidents that are not called for. For example, touching a vehicle that belongs to a Kenyan who has no business with what is going on and is just going on with his own business is not a good thing to do. I know our constitution is anchored, demonstration is anchored on our constitution very well, but I think it is bold that this demonstration, picketing, must be peaceful. Mm-hmm. And in definition, anyone who is carrying crude weapons is not demonstrating peacefully. So my take on what is going on at the moment is not peaceful demonstration. I think it's a way of toppling a government that is in place. Mm-hmm. And if we look at the approach and the Azimio leaders, the way they are trying to figure out their demonstration strategies, it looks like they want to overthrow the government, but in a very civilian, in a very civilized way. Mm-hmm. Earlier on, in terms of using, demonstration and picketing, but now things are out of hand. When we don't feel very safe as citizens of this country, our properties are not safeguarded, and people who are supposed to be doing that, the police, have not taken up their role very clearly in terms of protecting the property and life of Kenyans, then we have a call to worry. And our neighboring countries, currently have a lot of conflict. Mm-hmm. For example, Sudan. This is how it began. Everything starts from somewhere, mm-hmm. and eventually escalate up into a conflict that cannot be controlled. And eventually you're going to have a separate, groups that will have different interests. Others who just want to go and loot people's property. Others who want to have, control of certain territory, and so that they are able to put their own roadblocks and start taxing Kenyans who are moving around. So I tend to think that this demonstration is not going towards the right direction, that perhaps politicians, mm-hmm. in a civilized society like Kenya, mm-hmm. would have done it.
But already the protest was sort of declared illegal, even by the police. But now I just want us to talk about, the government had already offered, or there was a chance of bipartisan talks. And we do know that Azimio leaders said the government did not demonstrate good faith in the talks. What are your thoughts on that?
That is true. Definitely there was this bipartisan talk that was put in place, and the bipartisan talk was anchored on parliamentarians who have been elected by Kenyans to represent them, and therefore, according to the initial agreement, this was well placed in terms of them exploring and ensuring that all these issues that are raised are addressed within the corridors of parliament, and then they are able to come up with a better strategy, because when people are doing boardroom discussion, they're able to figure out appropriately what measures are likely to be used or are likely to be decided on, than when it becomes streets and demonstration strategies. Mm-hmm. And I think for Azimio to pull out of that, they have not come out very clearly why, because one of the reasons that they have put forward was about the membership of the committee, which one of the Jubilee member of parliament was picked by Kenya Kwanza, mm-hmm. and this has become an issue for them. But again, when you look at the representation, when you keenly look at everything in terms of the composition of Azimio team, I mean, they have only selected ODM members. Right. Around 2-3 of them are not non-ODMs, but definitely when you look at them very keenly, it's just a party issue, not a coalition issue. If that is the case, then Kenya Kwanza had also mandate to pick people based on regions. I realized that when you look at very keenly the number of people they picked, Kenya represent northern Kenya, and definitely in such crucial discussion, we want someone who will going to echo issues that are likely to come out from that discussion that will be of help or beneficial to northern Kenya. So we actually totally agree that the modalities and the approach that they have used in terms of picking these committee members were based on regionalization and representation, which in essence we thought it was a very good thing. But again, politicians look at their interest, where they know very well much of their interest will not come out very clearly, then they will definitely create an issue to disown the process, so that again people go back to the same issues that have been going on before. So my take on that is that I think the best thing for us at the moment is to go back to the bipartisan discussion. Let them come up with something. Even if that thing that they are coming up with is not satisfactory, we will have basis to discuss on issues related to what the opposition is now echoing out.
Right. Let's talk about the demands that Azimio had. Of course, one of them being that the government needs to bring down the cost of living, and the change of process of appointment of electoral commissioners. But do you think the cost of living has actually gone down?
Yes, no.
Right.
I mean, in terms of bringing down cost of living, one crucial thing, globally people look at issues of common approach in terms of bringing out cost of living. Demonstration is not one of it, unfortunately. Two, the government, I think, from the perspective of how they are approaching things at the moment, is that they want to look at things from not knee-jerk response, but look at it from a way in which once they make certain change in bringing, cost of living down, they will not want to go back to where they earlier on picked it from. For example, you remember there was this subsidy or that the previous government introduced, and that was not basically something that will going to last, because we cannot continue paying for subsidies when we know very well this is something that is continuous. It will never stop. The cost of living is a continuous process. I know the cost of living has not come down, but when you look at keenly some of the measures that have been put in place, drastically things are coming down, but we are not seeing it at the moment. Again, nature has also favored us. The rains have just fallen everywhere. I know each and every Kenyan who are farmers have gone to their farms and they're going to produce their own food. In the next 3 months, once they harvest their products, much of the things will be, in terms of cost, they will be minimal things that they're going to buy from the market if they produce their own, foodstuffs. The other thing that has also been favored by the nature, which we may not attribute it to either the government or the opposition's pressure, is, vegetables now are very cheap, because vegetables grow within 3 weeks, and they are everywhere. And now at the moment you can buy a bunch of sukuma with 5 shilling, 10 shilling, and before they were around 40, 50 shilling or 30 shilling, depending on where you are buying and where you are marketing from.
Right.
So I think the reason as to why I said it is both, the cost of living has slightly reduced, is because of those other external factors that has contributed to generally the cost of living. We hear the unga has reduced. The president yesterday was mentioning different categories of the cost of ungas, and each and every Kenyan goes to the supermarket, have the choice of either picking the low cost unga of 156 or 147, or go higher and buy the one which costs 200 shilling per 2 kgs. So it's the choice of the consumer to buy which kind of product he is able to afford and which kind of product he's able to utilize for his own consumption.
Right.
So I think generally, with pressure or no pressure, with government introducing some few measures that is likely to yield result in long term, the cost of living is drastically coming down. The milk, for example.
Yeah.
The cost, milk was very expensive. At the moment, we get, myself, I get milk from the Masais in my neighbors, and they bring the milk, and the cost has gone down from 100 per 2 liters to now around 60 per 2 liters. So that means other factors have also contributed to the coming down of, or reduction of the cost of living, which has no control or has no influence coming from all entities, both the government and the opposition who are pushing.
Of course, the positives and the negatives
Exactly.
there, but I want us to now get out of Kenya and talk about Sudan, a country that is in proper crisis right now. A lot of people have died in that country. I mean, what are your thoughts on it, and are you seeing any solution coming out of it?
Sudan is a very unique country. When you look at it very historically, all the governments that have ruled Sudan came in through coups. We just begin from Omar al-Bashir.
Right.
30 years rule, we call it dictatorship, but those are definition of other people, but he has ruled that country for 30 years. He has remained behind bars at the moment for things that perhaps he has done the last, the last part of his rule.
Right.
However, I think it is good to understand what is going on in Sudan in terms of what is it in terms of the struggle, the center of the struggle in terms of the fight, and what is going on and how it started. There are two generals who are fighting.
Right.
But when you look at historically, I was in 1998, I worked in Darfur, and the general who is in charge of the RSF,
Right.
the Rapid Support Force,
Right.
were teams which were, he's a general who has been given troops to go and suppress South Darfur people who wanted to be liberated from the main Sudan when they saw South Sudan was liberated from there. And their essence or their purpose was for them to govern that area and make sure that rebels do not prosper in those areas.
Right.
Now, when Omar al-Bashir established that unit, the purpose was mainly to push the rebels from those areas and ensuring that Darfur does not go the same way that South Sudan has gone. Later, the two generals, the military general and the general from the special forces, when civilian uprisings have started in Khartoum and they wanted to change of government from the current military to civilian, then after pressure has increased, they pushed out, they agreed that they push out Omar al-Bashir from governance. So therefore, both General Dagalo and General Burhan agreed on a common ground that they move Omar al-Bashir out of presidency. So they toppled that and they made it, and immediately, just cosmetic, face to show the civilians and the international community that we are not interested in, as military officers, we are not interested in governing of the country. They gave out a temporary transition civilian government supported by the military.
Yeah.
But in 2021, they toppled they removed that transitional government and then they picked up the government for them to rule.
Right, very
At this point, they agreed together that they were on the same page. But later, now time has come when they were now supposed to hand over the government to civilian, and the modalities in which they wanted to use is what was on the table. Two, they wanted to agree on who will be on top of the military. The special force, who are the paramilitary forces, And in essence, they are just called paramilitary, but these are militaries because the general himself is having a military rank. And therefore, that means they are actually military, but the initial formation was paramilitary style, like, who, you know, when Omar al-Bashir wanted to form that team. Then later, he brought together this team.
And of course, I think, you know, at the end of it, I think there's fight for power in all
Exactly.
this at the end of the day.
The bottom line is who wants to become the leader of the leader of the military, Sudan military.
Right.
This one who has been leading before, even during the time of Omar al-Bashir,
also wants to
want to continue leading, and this other one from